Thank you to Ubisoft for providing a code for today's video. Assassin's Creed Shadows is a complicated game to talk about, and let me tell you why. I like a lot of what this game does for the series. The core pillars of the franchise are apparent here, many of which have been evolved in Shadows. These improvements are most welcome, and it seems much of the feedback of more recent games has been implemented here in some way. However, many of the core pillars of Shadows are still being pulled down by many of the issues that have plagued the franchise. Mission structure, story pacing, open world bloat, and more. Even when I say that, I still feel like Assassin's Creed Shadows is one of the better modern AC titles, and for many people it's certainly going to be more of what they enjoy. But having sunk over 45 hours into the game, I certainly have my own set of thoughts and questions I want to answer in today's video. Does Assassin's Creed Shadows push the series in the right direction? Was my time with the game worth it? But more importantly for you, is Assassin's Creed Shadows any good? Here is my experience. The first thing we need to talk about is specs. No, not those, and certainly not these. Specs, in my opinion, are the core pillars of Shadows. Stealth, progression, exploration, combat, and story. These core pillars of Assassin's Creed have evolved and changed over the course of the franchise. And yes, all games have some form of these pillars in them, but they hold up much of what Assassin's Creed is today, even in its modern iterations. How well Shadows evolves or doesn't evolve each of these is key to my overall opinion of the game. And the first pillar I think is worth talking about is the story. A lot of my gripes with Shadows stems from the story itself. Whilst I like much of what Shadows offers, many of the problems lie here. The premise is fairly promising. It's laid out to us in the first hour or so, with Yasuke being taken in from slavery by Oda Nobunaga, ultimately being a part of the sacking and destruction of a large part of Iga, the home of our other protagonist, Naoe. Her entire life is destroyed during the prologue, losing her father to a masked faction known as the Shin Bakfu. After events transpire, Yasuke is left maskless due to the death of Nobunaga, which ties us back to that same faction. This leads both of our protagonists to work together and follow the path of vengeance and justice against this faction. It is right here that I have problems with certain elements of Shadow's story. The first being that there is no real internal tension at any point between Yasuke and Naoe, seeing as he was part of the initial reason her homeland was set ablaze. This could have been a real point of interest or conflict to explain each protagonist's motivations to one another over the course of the game. But instead of doing that, all of that is resolved in one conversation over a fire, which is a real disappointment. The story doesn't really pick up any speed or interest after these first initial hours until the final 3 to 4 hours of your playthrough. By the time you get there, you've slogged through 35 hours worth of story to get to that point. I actually really enjoyed Yasuke's conclusion and Naoe's conclusion to the game, and how the actual game followed it up and left some strings attached for future DLCs or what they could do in a future game. It's just a shame that by the time you get to that point, you've already become a little bit bored of what you are seeing. And a large part of this feeling is the storytelling and mission structure that AC Shadows follows. The best way I can describe the game's pacing is just slow, and that is a result of the tired mission structure. Each mission until the last few hours follows the same typical path. A slow exposition dump followed by visiting and infiltrating an area for more, and then the conclusion or assassination in this case. Exposition can be good in a game that has soft rails and a connected through line, but in Shadows it becomes slower as none of the missions are connected, as you have the freedom to approach the story how you want. Throw in two protagonists and it adds to a very disjointed nature to each mission. There isn't a flow or a hierarchy until later in the game, where it feels like you're actually making progress towards the end goal, but at that point I was tired. Shadows also falls down in the story department because of all the cutscenes being told in engine, but no extra work went into the specific facial animations. this has an effect on dialogue as well, because the voice actor could be selling the delivery, but the character is static, stiff, and rigid in their emotions, and you only know the intention by looking at the subtitles to give you tone. It works in just an open world sense, but when we actually go into proper cutscenes, it doesn't work at all. It doesn't really get better towards the end of the game either, because my particular highlight for Yasuke was dampened by this specific gripe. And more time to cook with these animations, I think it would have been better, but the story issue kind of remains. At this point, I think Ubisoft is giving the player too much choice in how to engage with the story. If Shadows had been more interconnected or restrictive in some senses of how you approach the story for a few missions at a time, it could have been better. The content was there at points, but the story was the weakest area of the game for me. It's so frustrating that the final part of the game was the best part of the game, but you had to wait 35 hours before you got there. Now, that's definitely not how I wanted to start off this review, being particularly negative about the weakest area, but I thought it was easier just to get the band-aid off and just talk about the biggest part that I didn't enjoy, because there's a lot of positives in other places, especially when talking about stealth. Wouldn't be an Assassin's Creed game without some good old-fashioned stealth. It's the backbone of the whole game and the whole franchise, in my opinion, and Shadows does it exceptionally well. This is one of the systems in the game that has really been improved over the previous games. As far as I would say, this is probably one of the best in the franchise, or at least in the more modern versions of AC. I mean, it makes sense this time, because you are a literal shinobi, and you have tools such as kunai, shurikens, throwable smoke bombs, and sound bells to distract enemies into the right location. And I think the biggest improvements this time are the inclusion of the prone mechanic and a grapple hook. Now, they don't sound like massive iterations and massive jumps, but it certainly changes how you approach areas of the game. It works best because of how each of the castles and environments are designed. There will be lush bushes, tall grass, bamboo that's all over the place that you can cut up, which is super fun, but there's also a lot of verticality that you can use that was off limits to you from previous entries. There's a lot of really fun ways to get around with Naue, and I particularly enjoyed that. It's super satisfying to go through various areas of the game, stealthily approaching, slowly opening doors, killing targets, and then leaving like a ghost in the night. I love the grappling hook a lot because it gives you access to routes that you may not have used before. All of the skills that you gain from the progression systems as well really make a difference here, and it's certainly a step back in the right direction for Ubisoft and Assassin's Creed. It really immerses you in the fantasy of being a ninja on the rooftops, which is one of the best aspects of the game. That is until you get access to Yasuke. Now, I get that he is primarily a samurai and isn't trained in moving around the world the same, but it can be really diluting of the experience because you are so limited in what you can do. He feels very clunky and unresponsive, which can undermine everything that you love about playing Naue. Having to go into your menu every time an 8-foot high wall causes you trouble to change to Naue and have an easier time moving around causes a lot of friction, especially for me, which isn't needed and is a detriment to the game overall. I get that Ubisoft is trying to make each character kind of polar opposites of one another, but taking this entire stealth sandbox and kind of throwing it out the window to an extent with Yasuke doesn't really mesh all that well. Being stealthy and quiet is an approach for many players, but you will ultimately end up having to engage in combat at some point, which is the next thing that we can go and talk about. Shadows does a great job for the most part at making combat feel different and impactful when you play. Parrying, dodging, and countering all comes into play, but they'll allow you to deal more damage when you nail this system. There is also a posturing system that rewards you by breaking enemies' guard, which you'll be doing a lot throughout the game. Each protagonist has an access to a bunch of tools that they can use. Naue has 3 of them, being the katana, the kurishigama, which I think is pronounced that, and the tanto, each with their own skill tree, special moves, and improvements. The katana is your like all-rounder weapon with swift strikes and great counter upgrades, The Kurishigama is a ball and chain with a knife as well that provides armor breaking and large AoE attacks. And lastly, we have the Tanto, which uses the blade and also the hidden blade that you have on your wrist. And I really enjoyed this. Naoe feels fast, nimble, and fluid, which is a stark contrast to Yasuke, who is more brutal, heavy, and powerful. Shadows has done a great job in defining these differences. Yasuke is especially brutal with the Kanabo, a traditional Japanese club. Just watch this clip. A long katana, which, hey, it's a katana, and a naginata, which is a long spear that gives you a lot of AoE as well. Yasuke has many options, but having to choose between 5 weapon options between 2 equipment slots, so you can only have 2 weapons equipped at a time. I really feel like the bow or the teppo that you get on Yasuke should have been an optional thing that you can have out that isn't going to take up one of those slots. I say that though, every weapon has unique finishes and animations that feel great, including some pretty great abilities designed to do various things, although I wish they were more powerful than they sometimes feel in the later portions of the game. As sadistic as this sounds, killing people with these animations over and over never really got old, and cutting someone's head or knocking it clean off their shoulders was just so satisfying. I will say that the developers have done a good job in making both characters feel distinctly different, but I'm not too sure whether that's a good or a bad thing, because you can feel like you're playing 2 entirely different games at times. In the same way that Naoe feels stronger in stealth than Yasuke, Yasuke feels incredibly strong in combat, so it feels like picking Naoe for certain fights is just the worst option. But when you do play as Yasuke, you basically subvert all the stealth in the game, which whilst awesome at times, you end up just like hacking away at everybody, and the novelty does wear off at a certain point. And I say that because combat does become pretty basic after a while, and it hasn't evolved in the later levels. It forces you to grind to get your level higher, and making the end levels easier. Certain enemies essentially become sponges when you're playing as Naoe, which can expose some of the weakest areas of combat, which is the basic aspects of it. It is fun, don't get me wrong, but how long that fun lasts is entirely down to each player who plays it. I can see what Ubisoft has tried to do here. They're trying to satisfy that samurai playstyle and that shinobi playstyle, but they don't really get the full experience. It kind of flip-flops between them at times. What I think they could have done, which would have been a lot better, was have Yasuke as a side character or like a main helper in the game. And whenever you want to find out about his backstory, you get to play as Yasuke in those missions that you do in the main story of Shadows, and I think it would have been a little bit better. And then you come out of those specific cool moments, so you remember Yasuke's story a little bit more, and then you can have the full gameplay and full setup of Naoe as a shinobi. I think it would have been the best of both worlds. This then leads us nicely into talking about progression in the game, because it's a big part of the more modern Assassin's Creed games in the last few years. The attempt at making Assassin's Creed more like an RPG hasn't really worked for me, and it hasn't really changed in Shadows. It's essentially a number go up simulator with whatever weapon that you are using. Because there is so many legendaries that you can get across the game, it feels like they don't have as much value being a legendary weapon. Like sometimes a purple will just be better than a legendary you are using. The ability to engrave things on weapons is pretty cool, giving you like more poison, bleed damage, adrenaline gain, that type of stuff is pretty fun. But the problem is there is no stats screen for the stats. Sure, there are stats on the weapons and gear themselves, but there isn't really an overall screen that you can look at for posture DPS, ability damage, bleed or daze build-up, adrenaline gain, like a full overview of what you want to see. And if they want it to be more RPG-like, how are you going to be able to do that without a stat screen? It even says our base stats have increased as we level up. Only full stats that we see are on the left-hand side of your equipment when you open up your inventory, which is your armor and your fall damage value. How this made it through QA without somebody going, guys, we haven't got a stat screen here. You might want to add that. I don't know. In contrast to this progression system, I really do like the way Shadows approaches skill trees and ability progression. It doesn't force you to go out and explore, but there will be various activities across the world that you will run into that give you knowledge. Shrines to pray at, lost pages that you'll find in certain locations, Kaba teachers that have Yasuke practicing samurai techniques, archery challenges, flashbacks via meditation. They may seem trivial, but building up your knowledge will give you access to higher areas of the skill tree. Although you need to earn mastery points to unlock a lot of these skills, you can kill targets, level up, etc. But it's nice to see that you aren't just grinding for the sake of grinding. You have to engage with the world of Shadows, and I think that's very important. I did say previously that it was a hard choice to pick between 5 weapons for Yasuke and 3 for Naoe, but much of that friction is alleviated here in the skill tree because you can reset your mastery points at any point, at any time, and move them into other areas for absolutely free. So if you want to change things out to go with a different setup, you can do. So I would often change things to see how all of the different weapons work. Progression is a real area that I think Assassin's Creed has struggled with over the last couple of modern iterations. And although there are some improvements here, it still feels like an RPG light and too much like other games. And it really kind of stands out like a sore thumb of something that I just don't think fits here, or they haven't been able to do right. I haven't even talked about the hideout system in the game, which feels very much tacked on for the sake of some progression. You get a lot of loot in the game, which is just like decorations that you can have around this hideout, and you can build like your perfect shinobi village, but I didn't really feel like engaging it in all that much. All I needed was the forge for upgrades and the scout area for more scouts to have for helping me discover things, and that was pretty much it. I didn't feel like it was worth engaging with at all, and it was just another system of progression. So far we've done 4 of the possible 5 pillars. The last is exploration, because I think this is arguably one of the best parts of Shadows. What Ubisoft Quebec has crafted here is not only a technical marvel, but something highly immersive that I found myself in awe of during my time in the game. To point out some important details at first, this game during my 45-hour playthrough crashed 0 times on console. I had almost no bugs beside the obvious like animations being wonky here and there. I had a bit like right at the beginning, which was kind of hilarious, and the sound one time cutting out after I did an ability. But apart from that, it was relatively bug-free, or just almost completely bug-free. On console, it kept a solid 60 FPS on the performance mode, and only really dropped if I went to like a new area occasionally, or I went back to the hideout where it would drop maybe down to about 30-45 FPS. And I'm hearing that it runs exceptionally at 4K on PC. And it's got to be one of the most polished and well-running open world games I've played from not only Ubisoft, but from many other AAA developers over the last couple of years. And I'm not just saying that to kind of hype this up. It really runs very well. Shadows not only does a fantastic job of running well, the game is just graphically stunning across the board. The different environments that you'll visit have incredible lighting that affects so much of the game. Weather situations, including like rainstorms, blizzards, and bright sunny days. The way that water sits, the different sounds when you're walking around on different like terrains and stuff. I know it's not really something people pay attention to a lot of the time, but it was really felt here. And the amount of effort put into making this world work, first and foremost, but to make it look bright, calm and tranquil at times in many different places. And my favorite part about the game was kind of going up to these vantage points and just letting it spin around and seeing the different environments throughout the different seasons. This mechanic to me is wild because changing seasons almost feels like you're going into 4 different worlds whenever you're exploring them. At points during the winter, you'll see icicles on the tops of different buildings. The snow will affect how you move. You'll also slip over on icy surfaces like water that's frozen over. But in the summer, the world is much more bright and vibrant, in the spring as well. And then you have that dull autumn colors that you kind of settle into, which has a little bit of a warmth in a sense, but it feels like autumn. And it's crazy to me that they've been able to pull this off, because it changes seemingly the whole world that you are in. And to put that level of effort into it has to be appreciated. I will say one of the things that I think has been improved here is they've kind of dumbed down the ubification of the world. Whilst there aren't thousands of map markers that are thrown at you right away, you'll discover things by yourself. You'll use rumors and scouts to find things of interest. Even quests and assassination targets are in rough locations, and you have to look at the hint that it gives you to kind of scout them out. It's certainly a lot better than many of the other AC titles in that regard, but it still suffers with a lot of bloat. What I like to call junk food filler type of side content. There's a mountain of other side assassinations that you can do, side quests and castles to go and clear to get loot, the typical type of stuff you've seen in Assassin's Creed games before. And I think this is an area that could have been improved a little bit more, especially the mission design and side stuff kind of feels like we've seen this before. And I think that they've nailed this formula of reproducing it. It's not really doing anything better or worse for me in terms of how I feel about the game. It just kind of feels the same as what I've seen before, which I would argue is worse than reducing the fat of the game or evolving the open world missions and side content into something more gratifying to do. I enjoyed tackling a lot of this stuff during my 40-hour or 45-hour playthrough, but after I reached that 40-hour mark, I was kind of done with the extra stuff and I wanted to focus on the main story. At the start of the video, I said Assassin's Creed Shadows is a complicated game to talk about, which is why I asked the questions to truly capture how I feel about the game and ultimately put it across to you. I asked the question, does Shadows push the series in the right direction? In many ways, I think it does. It evolves a few of the core pillars of the game, and if they can take the energy and channel it into the other areas, especially how the story is told and kind of being a little bit more restrictive and making it flow a little bit better, reducing some of that fat but still providing the level of quality that I have seen in Shadows, I think we could see an Assassin's Creed game be even better than this. But I can understand that the direction of more modern AC games aren't particularly what people enjoy, especially since they've kind of shifted away from doing more Animus stuff. And the Templar versus Assassins conflict doesn't really get focused on enough at times, or kind of the background stuff that isn't related to the current day that we're in. It's not really done as well here in Shadows. But I do think that Shadows might be my favorite modern AC game at the moment, but I would need to go back and play the last 3 again to really judge. I also asked 2 important questions. Was Assassin's Creed Shadows worth my time? And is Assassin's Creed Shadows any good? After spending 40 hours with the game, I certainly don't think it was time wasted in at least 80% of the game. There was a lot of times where I was trudging through the main story to get to that conclusion, which was satisfying to an extent, but I wish there was more of that littered throughout the entire game rather than the last 5 hours. We can then follow up this by saying, is Assassin's Creed Shadows any good? Yes, I think there's a lot of good things in this game. Many areas such as stealth, the open world exploration, parts of combat and progression that I think a lot of people will enjoy. Assassin's Creed Shadows is a very safe game and moves the needle just slightly in the right direction, which I think that's what Ubisoft kind of needs right now. Which is why my final verdict is a little bit more difficult to put into one singular sentence and recommendation. So instead of 1, I'll give you 3. If you like the Assassin's Creed games and want to know if Shadows is worth picking up, I would recommend this game, as of many others have probably played it already. If you are interested in checking out this game, I would recommend it, but I would recommend it at a discounted price because I don't think it is worth the $70 price tag. But if you are looking for something groundbreaking and different to the franchise, I can't recommend this game to you. I hope this video was informative, and I'd like to thank Ubisoft for sending me a code for the review. And I'm going to curl up into a ball now after spending the last 5 days cramming this game in to get a video out. So if you did make it this far, I would really appreciate if you left a like and commented on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here for more content like this alongside many other stuff. And as always, this has been It's Jimbo, and I'll see you guys next time.